Yes, please.
Good evening, one and all. I welcome you all to the day 5 of session 2 of our review workshop. We started on a gradual scale of presentations, starting from simple, and today is the day when we'll be having 2 sessions that will cover the most important and the most common study designs or manuscripts that we wish to read or write. And they are the RCTs and systematic review and meta-analysis. David from AIMS Jodhpur and Dr. Nitesh Tiwari from AIMS Delhi. To begin with our first lecture, let me introduce Professor Suresh Sharma. Sir is the professor and principal of College of Nursing at AIMS Jodhpur. He did his MSc from PGI Chandigarh and then PhD from Punjab University. He holds fellowship, multiple fellowships, including fellowship from ICN Leadership Program, Geneva, Switzerland, and International Postdoctoral Fellowship in Nursing from San Francisco, USA. He is also the recipient of Florence Nightingale Award 2001. He is currently the member special invitee for 6 new AIMS. He has authored multiple textbooks, around 11 textbooks, 45 chapters, and numerous publications. Without delaying it further, sir, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ankita. At outset, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Asit Chuk and Professor Divya, who has brought me on board to speak on the day. And they have allotted me very important topic, which is very close to heart of any clinician, be it a physician or a nurse or any class of healthcare professional. Just give me a moment to share my slide and then I'll begin the discussion. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes.
Perfect. So I'll be speaking today reviewing about randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials are titled as a gold standard evidence in the medical science or health science. If you look at pyramid of levels of evidence, the topmost and level 1 is systematic review and meta-analysis of RCTs. And in the next level is a well-conducted randomized controlled trial. So once today these two discussions are going to happen, I'm beginning with randomized controlled trials. Not only this, the drug, device, or a surgical intervention which has been tested through randomized controlled trial. The author has a great responsibility to communicate superiority intervention vis-a-vis the other interventions, be it a placebo, be it other intervention. Nonetheless, the reviewers and journals do have an equal responsibility because they are publishing it. And they are, through this, the author is disseminating information to the people who are going to use this information. And if the weak evidence has been reported, brings the reputation of journal at stake. And not only this, this is going to affect the care which has been provided by using this new intervention which has been labeled as a superior. So it is very important to review very critically and very carefully the randomized controlled trial which are going to publish in a journal where you are a reviewer. But I say that be constructive when you are reviewing the, just give me a moment, I'll just take out pointer, yeah. So be constructive because randomized controlled trials are very difficult to conduct. And our focus must be to look that the minor flaws which are there are taken out and quality of paper is improved. If there are not major flaws and this randomized controlled trial results are published and clinicians and practitioners make use of it for the betterment of the quality of care which we provide to our patients. It is very important in randomized controlled trials to look at study design, which is must be critically evaluated to determine the trial validity before we make a decision that whether we should publish this or we should recommend for publication of this particular RCT in a particular journal where we are reviewing. Now, before I go about how to review, let me just have a recap about randomized controlled trial. Here you are a researcher, you have a population of patients from where you randomly select a sample, desired sample based on your sample size, which you have estimated. And then you randomly allocate to experimental and control group to control the confounders which may affect your results. So here randomization is random allocation of subjects to 2 or more groups is one of the very critical steps. Then you do a allocation concealment and then blinding of intervention or observation or measurements. And finally, the outcome are compared. So this is a basic fundamental conceptual framework of a randomized controlled trial. Now, this is one study which I found published in 2008. Journal asked 106 peer reviewers and gave them 3 previously published RCTs. And what they did in this study, they made 9 major errors deliberately. And then they handed over to this 607 peer reviewers to look into these manuscripts and identify the errors. And unfortunately, only 2.6 mean errors were identified these 106 peer reviewers. It means there is a risk of missing these errors. And if we miss these errors and RCT is published and there are flaws, we are equally responsible with author. And journal's reputation may go at stake. So RCTs have a special requirements for conducting and reporting. Therefore, peer reviewers also must very carefully check randomized controlled trial before they approve it to be published in the journal. Now, another study which says that there are 200 reviewers and 117 participating editors. Once they were asked how you make a decision of publishing RCT, these 171 participating editors said that for us, what matters is reviewers did or did not recommend. Is the final decision and then we publish it. So where the responsibility comes ultimately on reviewers' shoulders that whether we need to approve this or not. And we have seen in our past slide that in fact, imperfection in peer review system tend to happen, and we should try to minimize them as much as possible, because this is only the standards used universally accepted format of critically reviewing the work before it is getting published. So we have a major responsibility. That is about setting a stage about my topic, that it is essential and we need to be very careful when we are reviewing randomized controlled trials. So when we review the randomized controlled trial, what we use, commonly we have seen RAMBO is a mnemonics which we use to assess a randomized controlled trial. What is that RAMBO? The first thing is we look whether the randomization has been done or not. It means the subjects which have been the sample which has been drawn from population, which has been randomly allocated to experimental group and placebo group or other intervention. There had been allocation concealment, and there had been baseline similarity of the group. Means both the people who have been assigned in both the groups were having baseline similar characteristics. Now I will be highlighting about allocation concealment. Means the person, next patient or person who will be coming, neither the person knows nor the researcher knows that under which intervention or control group this is going to go. And the third party is developing a sequentially generated number and then a decision in an opaque envelope, which is handed over to the researcher, and then immediately before the patient arrives, opens and decides whether this patient will go under experimental or control group. That's an allocation concealment or concealed allocation. After randomization, for Rambo, A is attrition, whether there was adequate follow-up or if there was a loss to follow-up, means the patients who have left either intervention group or control group. In that case, whether intention to treat analysis was used. This is a specific method of analyzing data for considering a formula of including the loss to follow patients. And then experimental interventions where the groups were equally treated and there was no, more than 10% loss to follow. If that loss to follow was there, then there was intention to treat analysis used. And measurement this was done by blinded assessors, because if assessor knows that this was experimental and this was control group, the effect of this knowing can happen. Similarly, the blinding has a value of placebo effect. So, and the next is whether the objectives were measured, there was objective measurements. Means the instruments were such that, or observations about outcome variables were such that it was objectively measured. If it is repeated, the same kind of results will be there. But Rambo is not sufficient. Rambo we have used since last many years for reviewing RCTs, but this is not enough to ensure that, to make a wise decision whether this RCT is good enough to be considered for recommended for publication. Then what? We have other aided tools now available with us. I'm listing here 4 of them. The first is consort guidelines. Consort guidelines are reporting guidelines which are available freely on Equator website. And these guidelines are used how to bring a uniformity into reporting the randomized controlled trials, so that author does not miss anything which need to be reported. And while we review, we need to see that we hold the consort checklist and we compare that all the parameters have been reported by author in the manuscript. Second is intervention. When we talk about intervention, if it is a drug, it is fine. If it's a particular device, it is fine. But if it is a surgical intervention, whether intervention has been adequately described sufficiently to understand and to replicate subsequently if it is used after the RCT is published. So it is basically known as the DIRE, and this is actually extension of 5th item of the consort checklist, which I'll be describing in detail in subsequent slides. Third is Cochrane's risk of bias tool. We must assess that how much risk of bias has been controlled in RCT. If there is a risk of bias, then results which have been generated are by chance, but not by choice. So in that case, we need to do this. And 4th is grade guidelines, which I'll be describing in brief. So let us understand consort checklist or consort, reviewing assessment checklist. So what we need to see in this, I'll be just minutely telling you a few highlighting points. Rest you can refer from this website, which I have listed at the bottom. See that identity. When you read the title, in a title, the randomized trial is appearing. In abstract is written into a format of consort, that is the trial design, the methods, the results, and conclusion has been given by following consort abstract format. In a background, there is a scientific background and there's an explanation about that this evidence has not been yet studied and there's a gap. That's why we are studying this, and there's a specific objectives and hypothesis. In a trial design, we precisely define about trial design, mentioning parallel design or factorial design or other type of design like split body design. It has to be precisely written there. And allocation ratio, whether there was equal 1:1 allocation, or there were more into one intervention and less into control or placebo or other intervention. And there was any change if made into methods of trial that has been reported because of any eligibility criteria which has been changed in between the trial. Then eligibility criteria for participants, we call it as inclusion criteria, has been mentioned into manuscript. Setting and location of where the study has been conducted. Intervention precisely, I'll be speaking more in detail inside next slide. completely define pre-specific primary and secondary outcomes. And any change into trial outcome which has been made in between the study, sample size estimation, applicability and explanation of interim analysis if it has been done, or any change which has been made during that. Randomization, how the randomization or random allocation or sequence allocation has been done. We have simple randomization, we have block randomization, we have, and then should write about blocking, block size, if stratify randomization, or a particular factor fixing randomization. So that has to be explicitly written into manuscript. Mechanism which is used for random allocation or sequencing, like sequential number generator, who did, where it has been done, how the allocation was concealed, either it was a computerized opaquing, or it was a opaque sealed envelopes which had been used, and who generated this allocation sequence, and then how it has been given to researcher or participant, how blinding was done, who all were blinded. This has to be explicitly written in methodology. If it is not written, we need to send it back by comments that these things has to be written by the author, and then send us back so that we can again review this. I was talking about intervention. If it is a drug, it has to be detailed there. If it's a device, it has to be detailed. If it's a surgical intervention, it has to be detailed. If it's a nursing intervention, it has to be detailed, because once it is precisely detailing, then the person who is reading and want to use it understand that, okay, this is something which we need to do. So brief name of this drug, device, or intervention, why there should be rational theory, goal, essential elements, why this intervention is used in this trial, and whether any biological or scientific basis behind it, then what it is, what material, how delivery is done for this intervention, any appendix or URL to access the detailed information about this particular intervention, procedure, how it is implemented during the research, who provided it, like here the intervention psychologist, nursing assistant, or just for example I've given here, how it is done, how delivered, face to face or through different mechanism, if it is like some message intervention, where it is done. So intervention has to be checked into this format. If it is anything missing, we say that kindly explain about the procedure of intervention, or where it has been done, who did, kindly describing, and then we send the back this manuscript to the author. Now, Cochrane risk assessment we primarily use for systematic review and meta-analysis to assess the quality of the study, to check the quality of the evidences which has been generated by the researcher through the RCTs. But again, when we are reviewing the manuscripts as an RCT, we need to check that these biases are not there. If they are there, then they are explicitly addressed and written so that somebody is doing systematic review on this RCT knows that this was the level of evidence which has been generated. And these are 6 important components: the random sequence generation, allocation concealment, blinding, and blinding of the personnel who is performing intervention, and blinding of person who is assessing. So that is to avoid that performance and detection bias, and incomplete outcome data, that is attrition bias. And then selective reporting, that is reporting bias, means only positive thing is reported. And there were 2 primary objectives, there were 3 secondary objectives, but only 1 primary objective and 2 secondary objectives are reported because they were only positive, rest were negative. So selective reporting has not been done by author, and we need to see that these selection bias by these 2 things which we avoid, and performance bias and detection bias and attrition bias, reporting bias, is not there in. If it is there, it is explicitly reported in manuscript. Now, this is the I was talking about GRADE guideline. GRADE guideline also we use to assess the quality and certainty of evidence which is generated through RCT. And these guidelines are used to do the systematic review and meta-analysis. But as an assessor, a reviewer, we also should use them while we are assessing the quality of RCT before it get published. So it categorizes very low, moderate, and high. And these are the parameters which we look for: risk bias, imprecision, inconsistency, indirectness, publication bias, large magnitude of fact, dose response ingredient. So I won't be going in detail. When you can go and read about GRADE guideline in detail. It speaks about risk biases, which I have talked about from the Cochrane. And imprecision means the effect size of intervention is such that we can conclude that this effect is because of the intervention, not because of the confounders. Consistency means if this experiment is repeated, it is going to give the same result. Indirectness means that we say that we assume that this is because of this. No, in RCT we can't say. We say yes, this effect is because of this independent variable on this independent variable, and the reporting, negative and positive reporting should be done either the intervention is effective or not effective or less effective. Now, this is a brief checklist of summarizing all the discussion which I have done. Quickly, we must check whether there is a novelty into this idea and there's a scientific basis into this idea. And then we need to check that the trial results are valid under these headings, like randomization has been done, location concealment has been done, blinding has been done, or if it is not done, then it is explicitly reported. Homogeneity of group was ensured. If not ensured, what was the reason? Degree of loss to follow-up, intention to treat analysis used or not used, sample size, adequate sample size was there or not, and it was estimated and reported that the sample size was adequate or inadequate. Precision of results, appropriate use of statistics like in RCTs, absolute risk reduction, relative risk reduction, or number to treat, these has to be there. These are called as cracks of RCT statistics. Consistency is there between the results, the objective, hypothesis, results, discussion, and conclusion and abstract. They should not be mismatched. And no indirectedness. There is a direct effect of this on this. No assumption and presumptions, and free from any kind of bias. And last but not least, that does results have clinical relevance? If not, then why we should publish in our journal and why we should occupy this space? Now, these are do's and don'ts. I think time is not there, so I'm just skipping them. And major flaws which generally researchers do is they don't take ethical approval, participant consent, and this is fatal flaws. Methodologies do not describe sufficiently about, and then you can't, if you have to replicate, then intervention is not explicitly described. So how reader will understand? Post hoc analysis, researchers do this, but this has to be explicitly mentioned in the manuscript. Important and relevant research not cited. The important research, the small RCT, 2 RCTs has been done, they are not cited, then it means that he has no concept about what has been already done. Study limitations has not been adequately listed. Conclusion do not match to the results. Then these are major flaws, and we should then think to consider and give the major revisions to the manuscript. Other major revisions are trials are not registered. All outcomes mentioned in objectives are not reported, or there is underreporting. Statistical analysis in RCT is, if it is so complex, sometimes you do not understand, then write to editor that you take a statistician's help, because this analysis I was not able to make out of it, because sometimes we don't know all the statistics which are there, and new statistical tests which are emerging. Minor flaws which we can get it revised, like writing is clumsy, so we can ask them to take help of English expert. Lack of clarity in argument, so we say that there's a mismatch between background and discussion. Minor details missing, so we can ask them to provide. Unclear tables and figures, we can ask them to explicitly report about them. Now, this is, we should not write ambiguous feedback to title inadequate. We need to very precisely say what is the problem with title. You're not mentioning RCT, or you're not mentioning independent variable or dependent variable or population. Abstract if there's some information are missing, then ask specific information. You can't write abstract is missing information. Argument need for the study is incongruent. Now, these all are ambiguous comments by reviewers, and then author will have many questions like what exactly. So explicitly we should write, this is an example of good written feedback about what exactly you're asking in title to improve, keywords, abstract, and methods, and then say that this is what we are expecting from you, and this is the refer the consort guideline, use this, and then provide us back so that we can review it. So other important points, deadline with your own, dealing with your own bias is very important. So this research is coming from a good institute, So you already, become biased over there. This will be definitely good. No, don't feel that. And don't be prejudiced about if it is coming from, some institution, which is, let's say we always feel biased at a private institute. This is newly started institution, so might be not good. No, those biases, prejudice, and conflict of interest should be kept away. Always use constructive criticism. Be humble and nice while writing comments on research work. Don't be very negative. Otherwise, many times authors get discouraged and then they don't resubmit to your journal, and your journal sometimes may miss the very good papers. So these are few things at the end. Thank you so much for listening me patiently, and you may reach to me on this email ID and further any questions are required. Thank you so much for listening me patiently.
Thank you so much, sir, for your presentation. Shall we take few questions, sir?
As your plan.
So the first question is by Dr. Sonal. She says that if a trial has been registered in CTRI, then also consort checklist is important during reviewing.
Absolutely, because registering into CTRI is one of the fundamental prerequisite for any trial which we are doing in India. But when you are reviewing, you just check that a trial was registered. So this is trial registry is ensuring that you have reported to repository before you started recruiting the patients. But consort guideline is a guideline which is reporting guideline which authors should refer to write their manuscript, and reviewers should use it whether all the components has been given into manuscript to be accepted.
So in continuation of the same, there is a question that if there's an ethical approval from the institute, but the study has not been, or there's no trial registry done. Maybe she means that it has not been registered in CTRI, but the approval from the institute is there. How can they go ahead with the publishing of it if it's a RCT?
Okay, this is a gray situation which I have, being a reviewer, I have come across such situations. If you have obtained ethical approval from your institute, or if it's multicentric study, then group of institutes, you have followed all ethical parameters like taking consent from participants, and you have done your trial, but you have not registered. Still, you need to report this, that it has not been registered. Now, as a reviewer, I will leave it to editor to accept or not accept. If I will be editor, I will publish it by saying that trial was not registered. Because if trial is not registered, then only thing is you are not reporting into repository. But it is not a major flaws where you can reject a good RCT which you are feeling to publish, and you want to disseminate this information to the clinician which they can use. So I would like to publish it by reporting that there was all ethical considerations were considered. However, the trial was not registered into repository, that is CTRI.
Thank you so much, sir. So the next question is there some standard checklist for non-randomized clinical trials as well?
Yes, there is a guideline called the STROB guideline. You can go and visit Equator website, and all the reporting guidelines has been given there. Or if you want a very shortcut, then I have authored a book on research methodology and biostatistics. In the end, all these reporting guidelines has been given over there. You can refer there.
Okay. The
Either
next
it's an observational study, or it's a RCT, or it's a quasi-experimental study, it's a diagnostic study. For all the studies now, there are reporting guidelines to bring uniformity into the manuscript reporting. So the systematic review and meta-analysis, when we do on this, the life becomes very easy for the researchers.
We'll take one more question because then it would be 5:30 and we'll have to start with the next session. The last question is allocation concealment a level of blinding?
No. Binding and allocation concealments are two different things. This has to be done before the patient is recruited into trial. Let me little more explain it. Let's say you are using consecutive design in your clinic, the patients are reporting, and you have decided the patient with this particular disease meeting this inclusion exclusion criteria become eligible to be part of this trial. Now, what you do, you hire a third party, or you take up with other department into picture, and then you ask them, you generate a random number through by using computer. Let's say Dr. Ankita is doing a study in dental department in Jodhpur, and she asked me that, Dr. Sharma, I wish your help, and you generate random number for us, and we are using block randomization, and this is the block size, and you also prepare the concealment sequential number for us, and then you send us. So I will send the sequential generated opaque envelopes to her in a group of 10, and whenever the patient comes, she open this envelope, and then she come to know that this patient who is coming to me on now today on number 1 will be going to control. And the next patient who is coming, neither patient knows nor this researcher knows, or person who is recruiting into trial knows what is there in next envelope. Next envelope again may be for control, or maybe for the intervention, new intervention which we are testing. So this is the allocation concealment. Now blinding is participant do not know whether he or she is receiving a intervention drug or a placebo drug. This is a one type of blinding, that is participant blinding. Now the researcher blinding or outcome assessor blinding is when he is assessing outcome on a, let's say, take an example of a wound, and we are giving one particular type of drug which helps in healing the wound. Now we don't know, we don't tell the assessor that whether this patient belongs to the drug intervention group or placebo group. So this is blinding. So blinding could be for participant, blinding could be patient who is recruiting, the blinding could be for assessor, blinding could be for statistician also. And when there's no blinding, we call it open trial. And it should be adequately addressed into manuscript, whether there was an open trial, or whether the only participants were blinded, or outcome assessor was blinded, or none of them were blinded.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the presentation and the way you have answered and simplified the difficult topic like RCT. Thank you. Now moving
Thank you
on.
so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Asi, Dr. Divya, and Dr. Ankita for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Moving on to the next session for today, I invite Dr. Nitesh Tiwari, who's Associate Professor at Department of Periodontics, AIIMS Delhi. He graduated and post-graduated from KGMC Lucknow. His numerous awards to his credit. Naming a few would be, he was awarded the Best Original Research in World Congress of Dental Traumatology, San Diego 2018, and Johns N. Anderson Award twice. He is a fellow of Academy of Dentistry USA, Japan Dental Association, International Association of Dental Traumatology. Currently, besides Associate Professor in AIIMS Delhi, he is also the Director of International Association of Dental Traumatology and founding Joint Secretary for Indian Society of Dental Traumatology. Over to you, Dr. Nitesh.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's an honor to speak for Craniofacial Research Foundation, and that comes from my parent college. And it's always an honor to speak, to be invited by my own teacher, Dr. Divya, ma'am. Thank you so much. So today I will be dealing with in short and crisp time, which is there. I'll be talking about how you should be treating the systematic review manuscripts which come to you as a reviewer. So as a reviewer, you tend to get many manuscripts. Some of them fit into your expertise, some of them do not fit. But then ultimately, it's your duty to put all your thoughts in so that you can help the editorial team and help the authors. And that's what we will be discussing. So I come from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, which is the apex medical institute of the country. And this is the building where I am sitting right now. That's Center for Dental Education and Research. And it has got several accreditations to its credit. So I start with a question to all of you. Are you puzzled when a manuscript claiming to be systematic review that comes to you for a review? So it's a natural thought, because this used to happen with me all the time before 2018 when I was trying to review the manuscripts. That's what we will be discussing. So how puzzled are you? And the reason for that is primarily because we are not an expert in the field. We do not know how are we going to review it, and what are the elements which are there in a systematic review which are critical, what are the flaws which are to be identified, and how you should be presenting your final review to the journal office. Yeah. So if you just look into these 6 lines altogether, so it summarizes how difficult a systematic review is. So it's a definition, but if I break this definition into some parts, it becomes easier. So systematic review is a method to evaluate an evidence. So that's pretty clear. The people have done the primary researches, and we as a systematic reviewer, we are trying to just look into the evidence which they have claimed to be there for a particular research question, and that's the focused research question which is important for any systematic review. You cannot do a systematic review on broad categories like TMG ankylosis. You need to have a specified focused research question, either with the diagnosis or management or comparing the two modalities. Similarly, the systematic review is like a protocol driven research, because we have a pre-decided strategies for literature search, data extraction, the team, and the quality analysis. And with the advent of the fewer guidelines, which we'll be talking about, there needs to be a clear presentation of what we have found. It's not that we have done a review and then we just put everything together in a 30 pages manuscript, because ultimately it has to go to a journal. It's not your PG thesis. So then that there has to be a clear and precise presentation of the findings, and usually it is done by a team. So that's quite important, because if I say that I did a systematic review, I'm actually falsifying the fact, because I cannot do it. There has to be 2 or 3 people who are working together in order to reduce the bias or the confounding factors, and one of them should be a subject expert. So if I am not an oral and maxillofacial surgeon and I try to publish a systematic review on best treatment modalities for TMJ ankylosis, so I have not done cases of TMJ ankylosis. I am not the clinician in that field, so I will not be the subject expert. So I need to have somebody from the core group who is there, an expert who is dealing with those that clinical situation day in day out, and then finally we can arrive at a conclusion, because otherwise there will be a bias. So then just to give you a thought that what is the difference between systematic review and a narrative review. So these are the few pointers. There is they both systematic review is a method to evaluate the evidence, while narrative review is just an opinion. So if I'm writing a review on a pulpotomy, it will be a very good resource, because I will be covering different aspects. But then there will be some problems with that narrative review. It might be good for you to write an answer in your PG exam, but as a researcher, it doesn't make any sense. Then it has got a focused research question. That's what systematic reviews are, while narrative does not have. There is no pre-decided search strategy for narrative reviews. It's my will and my wish that I will be doing only PubMed, or I will be doing only Scopus, or I will be doing only in past 5 years, and so on. While that's not the case with most of the systematic reviews. There is a clear guideline for presentation of the systematic reviews, while there is none for the narrative reviews. And the team of the reviewers, even I can write a 10 pages manuscript on any of the things in pediatric dentistry or dental traumatology, but then that is my opinion, that is not an evidence. So that these are the things which distinguish between the two. And as a researcher or somebody who is reviewing a manuscript, the narrative reviews fall low in the evidence level pyramid, and then they have got, these days they have got almost negligible chances of getting accepted in any good journal. So now, as a reviewer, once you receive a manuscript from section editor, then what is the editorial team expecting from you? So this is the key message which I want to give in this presentation. Number one, they are expecting that you are aware of the critical analysis of systematic reviews. That does not mean that you need to have done any systematic review. So if you are not aware, you can just work a little bit more. You can read a little bit more about what systematic reviews are, then you can perform your review. And if in case you find that you are not an expert, and maybe some other person will be best suited for the job, you can decline the manuscript review, and then they will select somebody else. Then second is the research question of the review relevant and falls within the scope of the journal? Like Dr. Suresh Sharma sir was saying, that it should be clinically important. Secondly, it should be related to the scope of the journal. So if I'm reviewing for Journal of Oral Biology and Craniofacial Research, and the journal is broadly not related to public health related interventions, then if a manuscript is coming to me as a reviewer, then I can write a comment to the editor that this does not fall into the purview of the journal, so it cannot be it should not be considered. So that's one thing. Then third and most important thing is there any similarity between the existing review with an existing review? Is there any similarity with an existing literature? So that's something quite difficult to judge, especially when it comes to making comments as a reviewer. Then can you distinguish between the different types of reviews? And are you confident in making comments about the protocol, methodology, data extraction and analysis, meta-analysis and reporting of the review? So the last question and the first one, they both are linked. So whether you are technically capable of making such comment or reviewing somebody else's work who claims it to be a systematic review. So in the course of next few slides, we'll be talking about the last 4 points. And first of them is whether it is a similar review which has already been done. So as an author of any systematic review, the first and foremost thing is that we need to ascertain it. So as an author, the person should have done it, but then you cannot rely on somebody else's judgment, and there can be a situation where the same review exists somewhere else. So then what you should be doing, so there are three major repositories or registries for systematic reviews which are free. There are many more. Then they did just an example that it's a Prospero or Open Science Framework or Joanna Briggs Institute repository. So these three repositories, and one of them as an example, like this is the Prospero. As we open the Prospero registration, this is what we see. And if you concentrate on the point number 4 here, so this point says that it should not be a duplication of a previous work, because doing systematic review takes time and effort, and if somebody is already duplicating somebody else's work, that does not add anything to the literature. There should be some difference. So then as a reviewer, what you should be doing is you can copy the title, put it on the PubMed, put it on any of the registry databases you desire, or do a Google search. If 4 or 5 or the initial searches do not reveal anything, you can just consider that it's not a duplication. And if it is a duplicate one, usually before COVID, Prospero used to do a very good peer review, and then they used to point out if it's a duplication or not. Then second thing which I was mentioning about similarity was about similarity with the existing literature. So we also call it plagiarism. And since systematic reviews or narrative reviews, they are concise presentation of previously published works. That's what review is. And then they tend to have a higher degree of similarity with the previous work. But that does not mean that you can copy somebody else's work into your manuscript and then you can send it for publication in any journal. So as a reviewer or as an editorial board member, you tend to have some softwares which can tell you what is the degree of plagiarism or degree of similarity. So that this is the Authenticate software which we get in AIMS New Delhi. So we use it, and there is no established norm that how much should be the plagiarism for a manuscript to be acceptable. So but then it should not be duplicate. If you are seeing a biochemistry or maybe a basic sciences manuscript with too many of the things which are there related to any reagent, or you are seeing so many of the scientific terms which are definitely repeatable, so then you can consider even a similarity of 20 to 30%. But generally, in my opinion, and in most of the opinion of the journal editors, it's less than 20% which is acceptable. And usually you will not be getting those manuscript as a reviewer, because editorial board usually filters them. If you get it, first thing can be that you can put those things, those manuscripts into your Authenticate um, software, and that will give you a fair enough data for you to judge whether it's similar to a previous published work or not. So then next thing, about how are you able to distinguish between different types of reviews. So I will not be going into the detail of these things. I will just naming them so that you all are just aware that these are the things which can come to you as a reviewer, and they necessarily do not be a systematic review. The first is the scoping review. Scoping review is a review where you just tend to just identify a problem. It's a short search strategy and quite deficient in terms of evidence. Critical review is about the analysis of the only the quality analysis of the cited sources. Then there's a mapping review. So we did a mapping review for dental traumatology in last year, and that mapping review acts like a menu card. So like you go in a restaurant and then you have number of dishes, and you can choose the things you want. A mapping review is a very good source for you as an author, because then it will tell you what are the areas in your field which have not been worked till now. So you can choose the areas and then you can work for your primary studies, or you can work for systematic reviews. Then there is meta synthesis, which is different from meta analysis because it is related primarily to the qualitative studies, multiple qualitative studies. There is a realist review, which identifies the reasons for failing or thriving of a complex intervention. And then there are reviews of systematic reviews. So even we have been doing 3 of them as of now. So review of systematic reviews means that you are only making your judgment on the basis of the existing systematic reviews in any field. So as and when the evidence-based dentistry progresses, so as a reviewer, you will be getting these manuscripts, because people have got now more expertise and they are reading more papers, than journals are accepting these. Even the high impact journals are accepting these, because it's supposedly one of the best sources where anybody can just go and look into the evidence for their specialty. So these things are going to come to you as a reviewer. So before I thought that there can be a somewhat theoretical talk about what are the different components of systematic review, but rather I thought that I will just discuss a life cycle of my own systematic review, so that you can understand what are the different steps which we could take as an author. And since all the authors are going to be reviewers someday or for somebody else's work, so your knowledge will be enhanced in that manner, and then you will be able to make a better comment as a reviewer when you are reviewing a systematic review manuscript. So first and foremost thing for any of the systematic review is to develop a research question. So in this paper, our research title was the global status and trends of knowledge, attitude, awareness, and practice for prevention and emergency management of traumatic dental injuries in dental professionals. So we were trying to assess the awareness level of prevention and emergency management of traumatic dental injuries only in the dental profession. That's a focused question. So that's what the first thing is. Then you need to have a team. In a systematic review, when you are reviewing, generally if it's a blinded, you will not be getting this information. Otherwise, if you get that, especially for journals like BMC oral health, so if you get, then you can see that who were the people involved, not to make any judgment out of it, but to see the diversification of a field. So in this team which we did, there was a community medicine person who was an expert with literature search sources, and there was a statistician who could help us with meta-analysis. So then we develop a protocol which is generally done in a MS Word. So we have a 40-point checklist for Prospero, and we answer each question so that then we can register it in a repository. Here we registered this Prospero protocol on 16th of July 2020. Then it starts the main work, which is the literature search. Your thoroughness of the literature search is dependent upon your search strategy. So any of the authors who are sending their manuscripts, they would have some details of how they did the literature search. You can look into that. So in this review, we did literature search in PubMed, in Embase, in Scopus, in Lilacs, and in Web of Science. And then gray literature is usually searched by using Google Scholar or Open Gray Network. And then reference searching means that the articles which are finally selected, you look into their references, and then you see whether anything else is missed or not. We usually use EndNote as a reference management software. There can be Zotero, or there can be any other software like Remmen 5 is also there, which is also available for you to use. So it helps in removal of the duplicates, and it helps in evaluation of the first titles and the abstracts. And then once you are deciding that on the basis of inclusion and exclusion criteria, that which are the manuscripts which are you going to analyze for full PDF, you download them. And then once you have downloaded them and then you have scrutinized them, and you finally decide that next we are going to have this many, or maybe 5 or 10, whatever the number is, and they end up with you for final data extraction. So in data extraction, we usually develop an Excel sheet like this, which you are seeing. It's a real Excel sheet for that paper. So in Excel sheet, you have author, year, journal, and different columns where you extract the data like you do your case sheets, and then you finally fill it in that Excel sheet, which can be very beneficial. So then comes another element, which is risk of bias. So Dr. Suresh Sharma was talking about risk of bias in randomized clinical trial, and he used two terms, which was Cochrane risk of bias tool and GRADE. So similarly, for other types of studies, there is a risk of bias tool. So what do you mean by risk of bias, and why is it important for you to know as a systematic reviewer or as a reviewer for a systematic review? Number one, that you cannot have a reliability of equal nature from two authors who have done studies in different geographical conditions, or maybe a different strategies. So there will be one study which is very pure, best methods, best sample size, and there can be some study which is flawed. So then results will be different. So risk of bias will tell us that how reliably can you assess or can you judge whether the study's results are there or not. So in this study, we used a tool which is known as Joanna Briggs Institute's critical appraisal tool. So this institute is giving you some tools which are free to download, and you generally do it like we did for data extraction. We have an Excel sheet, and in that Excel sheet we write the author names and the years, and then we have different questions. We just answer it yes, no, or unclear. So in that manner, you do your risk of bias, and that's what you will be judging as a reviewer. And then there is a qualitative synthesis, which is quite easy. It might sound tough when you are reading it for the first time, but then it's just an answer or description of the tables which you have created till now. And then development of tables is from the data extraction sheet. Then for the qualitative analysis, after qualitative analysis, you have quantitative synthesis, which is the meta-analysis, and people are afraid of reading the meta-analysis, and especially the forest plot. I will just cover it. And then after your meta-analysis and the results, as a reviewer, as an author of a systematic review, we discuss our findings, and we discuss them on the basis of or on the backdrop of our level of evidence which have been there on the risk of bias. So for any systematic reviews, one of the most prominent thing is the table and the graphs. So as a reviewer, if you are reading a manuscript, keep the table and graphs ready with you. That this is the table number one from that manuscript which I talked about from my own work. So this is this is for the population exposure and outcomes. You have to define those terms, and there has to be a search strategy for at least one engine. So if the author is not providing search strategy, you can write it as a comment and you can ask them. So they must have done it, and if they have done it, they will provide, and that will add to the value of the systematic review later on, because any systematic review done has got no value after 5 years. It has to be repeated because there will be many more researchers who have done their work in the bit in that period. So this search strategy will help in getting the data or evidence at that moment. Then there is a Prisma chart which is there. It tells us about the databases, it tells about the search strategy, and finally how many articles were included. It also gives a list of the number of the excluded studies. They can be an annexure. They can be an annexure which you can ask the authors to provide regarding the manuscripts which have been excluded and the reasons for exclusion. So a good systematic review must have the entire detail of the what articles were excluded so that it becomes transparent. Then there should be a table like this, which should have all the details of authors, years, and then the study methods, the study designs of the included studies. That's the demographic tables, which we call. Then coming on to meta-analysis, just briefly. So this is a forest plot, which you will be usually seeing. So it's a forest plot for comparative studies. Here it was comparing two pulpotomy agents. So it's success rate, then total success rate, total two groups. It's the forest plot. And then there is a risk ratio. So if you are comparing two groups, you will get risk ratios. On the bottom half, it will be telling you which type of model has been used. So as a reviewer, you should be judging that which type of model should have been used. If somebody is having a higher heterogeneity and they have used a fixed effect models, then it is not a good idea for them to do. So you can write it as a comment that meta-analysis was not done using an appropriate model, but it does not call for you to reject the article. They can even go back and they can do a meta-analysis again, because because it's just a matter of clicking another button in a software, and the meta-analysis can be changed from a fixed effect to a random effect. That can be done. So there are a few variables which are there. Heterogeneity I square value, which is 18% in this forest plot, that means heterogeneity. So heterogeneity, by heterogeneity you mean that there should be some variability between the studies which were included. And heterogeneity, if it is more than 50%, it's quite difficult to do. Then there is a diamond, which is the final the outcome, or the final conclusion of that meta-analysis. If it is crossing this line which is in the center, that means that there is no statistically significant or a clear distinction between the two of the groups, the two intervention groups. And same is reflected in this odds ratio confidence intervals. You will see that it is crossing the line of no effect or one. Similarly, here you will see that there is a clear difference, and you can see that confidence intervals 1.73 to 7.61. That means it's in on the one side of the of the line of no effect. This is a funnel plot which you should ask, because in meta-analysis or in umbrella reviews we tend to use this funnel plot to know the small study effect. The studies, if they do not fall within this triangle, that means that the studies must be having some methodological problems. Then finally, once all the work is done, then as a manuscript writer or as an author, we have a Prisma guideline to follow. This is a checklist like the consort checklist which sir was talking about. It has got different things like title, abstract, intro. I'm not going into the details of it. So then this as a reviewer will help you in knowing that what are the things that the author should have added. So you are not supposed to do a checklist or do a tallying of everything, but then if it has been provided by the author as an annexure or as a file, then you can look into it, that what were the things which were not there in their manuscript, or you can point them out specifically related to Prisma checklist. You can even ask them to resubmit along with an annexure of a Prisma checklist. It has got everything which a systematic review should have. So finally, once our manuscript was done and we had submitted to Dental Traumatology Journal, this was the first comment which we got. So we get a comment like this, and as a reviewer, I will not rate this review or rate these comments as very clear, because that's what we will be touching on. It's just maybe a summary of the comment, but I'm happy because it finally got accepted. But then in the reviewer too, you will see that just a one statement, but the changes had been done in the manuscript Word file. So that's also your purview. You can select doing the changes within the Microsoft Word document. So this was the manuscript protocol, and then that was the publication which happened in September 2020. So that's how the life cycle goes, and then that's the slide back. So these are the things which are quite clear now, because as a reviewer you are expected to know these things. So now briefly touching the reviewer comments. These are the comments which I do when I'm reviewing a manuscript. General comments like for English language, for similarity, for plagiarism, for anything else, format, references, you can talk about it. Then title, abstract, introduction. So whatever shortcomings you note down, you just make some points so that the editorial board can make an adequate judgment on the basis of it. If you write a paragraph, it becomes difficult for editors to decide. Or if a journal like Journal of Oral Biology, Craniofacial Research, it gives an option of rating the manuscript, and that rating actually helps on a longer term. So there are certain additional tools which I will just name. One is Amstar 2. So Amstar 2 is a quality analysis tool for systematic reviews. So this tool has got these points, these checklists. So again, like for risk of bias we do for primary studies, Amstar 2 helps in knowing how biased or what is the quality of the confidence in the finding of a systematic review. So it's like risk of bias of a systematic review. So this Amstar 2 is generally for randomized and non-randomized trials. So you are not supposed to do the Amstar rating, because any of the published review can have a high or critically low or a low confidence, and that happens in the published literature. But then you can have things in your mind so that you can recommend it to the authors, because once it is published, it is going to be rated. You still have got a chance, or you still have got a chance to advise the author so that they can improve their manuscript if it is not irreparable. And then similarly, there's a Robis tool. The Robis is again a risk of bias tool. It comes from Joanna Briggs Institute, Adelaide, and it has got certain domains like eligibility criteria, identification of the studies, critical analysis, whether it was done, synthesis of the findings, and finally the overall judgment. So there are many points, but then it will be a good idea if you have got a review, a manuscript manuscript to review, but then you do not know anything about systematic reviews, you can go into these two checklists at least and see what are the things which are expected out of a good review. So that will help you as a reviewer in making your judgment while sending it back. So what happens when you accept a manuscript of low quality? That's like a general thing, but for systematic review especially, I will be talking about. You are promoting a low quality work that doesn't help in improving the author's skill or acumen. So if you are accepting my manuscript and that was a flawed manuscript, I will be happy that I was lucky, but I will be not learning out of the process. And then it creates ambiguity in the science related to the research question. You will not be able to give an answer to a problem. You will just adding another review which was not needed. Then third, it affects the image of a journal on a longer term, because if you are reviewing for a journal and then you are accepting a manuscript of poor quality and somehow it goes through the editorial office as well, then there will be something which is not very appreciable, and few of the good manuscripts will not reach you. Then it doesn't benefit you as a researcher. That's quite important, because as a manuscript author, you are supposed to as a reviewer, you are supposed to also learn in the process. So if you are not doing it properly, then you are not adding anything to your own knowledge. And then low quality articles attract letters to the editors, like we targeted few of them as a part of our journal club exercise, and our postgraduates found flaws, and we wrote letters to it. And so if your manuscript which you are reviewing, you should try your best that the things are quite clear, and these things don't happen, the manuscript correspondence don't happen, because you can give clear answers, you can guide the authors. So your role as a manager, that's the last part, last few slides. Your role as a reviewer of a systematic review, that's a larger role which you are going to play as a reviewer, because it's a personal tale for me, because I started my systematic review journey from 2016 October, when I did a 5-day workshop with Indian Council of Medical Research. But my first protocol was done and registered in 2018, and that paper in 2018 that underwent around 7 to 8 rejections, and then similarly additions, and finally it got accepted in Indian Journal of Dental Research in December 2020. In that course, in all the rejections which I received, they were quite good comments, and some of them were quite large. One of the comments was about the meta-analysis which we had done about the variability. Some of them had talked about funnel plot, which I showed you. So then each of the comment helped me in knowing more about the systematic review. So as a reviewer, it's your duty, because you can just tell the authors that these are the things which are wrong, but the manuscript overall is not irreparable. So you can still do some rectification. And as a reviewer, you can, like Dr. Suresh Sharma was saying, you can humbly ask the authors to do some changes as a minor correction or a major revision. And this is my personal log for dental traumatology and one more journal. So you can see how many rejections are there. So it's not that every manuscript will get accepted, but then each of these rejection is going to tell me that what extra I can add to my knowledge or to my next manuscript. And the result which was quite evident in past 1 year, then where you can see that these all manuscripts, they got kept getting accepted. And this is the most recent one, which happened around a week ago. So you can see that as a reviewer, it's a larger responsibility for you to turn a normal stone into a diamond. Some of the manuscript writers or some of the authors will definitely work their way, and they must have had the acumen and knowledge, and they will send you a finished product. But then if they do not, you should not just throw away all the manuscripts showing that it does not add anything to the literature. That's the most common statement which we get as an author. You should try and work your way, try and teach the authors. And if it can be brought into the high quality category, it will be doing a great benefit to that researcher and doing great benefit to the scientific literature. So with this, I would just pay my gratitude to my team in Center for Dental Education and Research, Department of Pedodontics. So that's my professor and head, Dr. Vijay Prakash Mathur, Kalpana madam, and Rahul, and all the residents and senior residents. And thank you very much. I will be happy to answer the questions, or if you want to contact, you can contact me in these platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nitesh. And thank you for presenting in a way where you've included your rejections also so well. It helps all of the people to relate much better.
Yes.
So, moving on to the questions. The first question is, as the systematic reviews can be updated, after how many years same research question or topic can be taken?
Okay, so the Cochrane has a system of updating reviews, and that review team has an onus to review it after 5 years usually, and they can even write it to the Cochrane oral health group or a Cochrane group in particular, and they can request that there has been some new research, and then that can be updated. But hard and fast rule does not exist for any of the research question. So if you are seeing that a review was done about diagnosis of external root resorption after trauma in permanent central incisors in 2015. But then you know that between 2015 to 2021, there have been three very good clinical trials which have some very good interventional data. So then you can decide on doing it, and mind you that the journal editors will not reject it if your work is well done.
Personally, Dr. Nitish, I would like to
Yes,
ask,
ma'am.
we see a lot of systematic reviews on same topic simultaneously also. So there are no standard ways to restrict the reviews on the same topic.
Ma'am, it generally happens that when I am thinking something, you must also be thinking the same. It happens with all the research. The moment we think that this is good enough, somebody else in any part of the world will be thinking the same. But then we should look into the Prospero registration. So that's why registration of your work is very important for clinical trials and for systematic reviews, because that amounts for your life's 2 or 3 months. Your 2 or 3 months will be gone, and finally the reviewer will be writing a comment that similar review has been published in the journal 2 months ago, 1 month ago, or you yourself when you are submitting, you will see that work has been published by somebody else. So then it's always better to play safe, look into the registries, look into the published work, and then finally decide.
Okay. The next question is on the same note.
Ma'am.
As a reviewer, how much emphasis should be given on selection or rejection for a particular SR if it has not been registered in database like Prospero? So if it's not been registered, what should be done?
So generally it should have a registration. So if it has not been registered in the Prospero, you can ask for registry in OSF or Open Science Framework also. But generally, once the review has been completed, it's not a good practice to register your work. But if you talk about in terms of evidence-based dentistry practices or evidence-based medicine practices, registration is not a mandatory thing. Registration is appreciable and it is recommended, but it is not mandatory. You should not reject a manuscript because there was no registration. You should look into in if there is no protocol, you can go into the PubMed and Google Scholar as a reviewer, and then you should find out if there is any duplicacy of any work, and then you look into the quality of the manuscript. If the manuscript is good quality, it will add to the literature and it should be promoted.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Then there was a similar question that if you have registered in Prospero, is there a time period before which we need to publish? Of course, the sooner you do it, otherwise you'll be late in the race.
Yes, I will take another personal example. So when I was working on a paper on evidence mapping of and quality analysis of systematic reviews in dental traumatology, so I started my work, and then when I looked into Prospero, it does not register the evidence mappings. So that's a different category of systematic review. So I registered in OSF, tried to do my work, and later on when I was finalizing it, and I had in my protocol that I will be looking into the table of how many registered protocols are there for dental traumatology in different registries like Prospero, Cochrane, and other things. So then there I found one review which was registered in 2020 December, and I was working in 2019 December, and I was working almost on the same period. But then that scared me because I had already worked around 1.5 months on the same topics. I wrote to the authors what was their status and whether they wanted to collaborate. They replied that they had left the project, so I could publish it easily. So the thing is that you need to have a fair idea in these aspects, because if you do not, then you will be losing out.
Okay. So the next question is, what is the basis for selection of a tool for quality assessment for systematic reviews?
The study design, the research question, And number third, that what is your objective or your aim in a systematic review? Generally, it is governed by the study designs. So if it's a randomized control trial, the best method to do a quality analysis or risk of bias analysis will be the Cochrane risk of bias tool and the GRADE protocol for evidence analysis. While if you are doing it for an epidemiological study, so the Cochrane does not entertain those things. So you need to go to other tools like Newcastle Ottawa scale, or you can go to the Joanna Briggs Institute. So Joanna Briggs Institute is a very good repository for systematic reviews, and it gives you sources for different types of study designs. So you have entire checklist even for the case reports. Yeah, if you want to do a systematic review only on the rare cases or rare case reports, you can have Joanna Briggs the critical appraisal tool for case reports for that systematic review. Yes.
The next question was, does a systematic review always require a control group, or we can do without a control group in research question?
So research question is needed for all the researches. So it's like that systematic review also require a research question. Otherwise, what you will be searching. And then for
Without
control
a
group,
control group.
with the control group exactly does not make any difference in a systematic review. That depends upon your research question. So if I am trying to see efficacy of an intervention, suppose I am trying to see which is the best pulpotomy material in primary teeth, so then in that case I will be having some control groups which are there in the primary studies. So I'm not going to make a decision on the exclusion or inclusion of the primary studies just because they have a control group or not. While if I am trying to see only the randomized control trials, then by default, all those randomized control trials will have a control group, and I will be getting the data from there, ma'am.
And there are many questions on the same line, that if there are observational studies only, how to do an SR? If only RCTs are not there, if they're just case reports, how
So,
to
so,
do
so, so I
the
will address it. I will address that in few statements. Number one, that systematic reviews can be done for any study you want, but then you need to have a focused research question that you should be developing, and it should be clinically important primarily or important for the research. So if you are doing a systematic review, you should put your thought together for research question. That's the starting line for the systematic review, and then develop a team. So if you have a team with you where people are experienced, or some people are experienced, some are non-experienced, then one day that inexperienced person will be the biggest resource for the world. So then that team need to be developed, and then you need to have a protocol. So all these three things are important, and whether you are doing it for a rare disease which is only reported in case reports, that's fine, you can do it. If it is for an epidemiological study like prevalence of traumatic dental injuries in India, prevalence of TMJ ankylosis in North India, or anything, you can do it. If there's a qualitative research, like if you want to know the awareness of the people regarding tobacco chewing, so then the harmful effects of tobacco chewing, you can do that. So they does not contraindicate. There is only one problem with which we face when we are doing systematic reviews for in vitro studies, because in vitro studies do not have a standard risk of bias tool as of now. So there are a few tools which are there, but that can be done. But otherwise, for all human-based interventions and even animal-based interventions, you can do any of the research. You can have any of the research questions. Yes,
You've answered the next question on your own. The
ma'am.
question was, can we include in vitro studies and animal studies also for systematic
Yes.
review?
The Prospero registers only the animal studies and human studies. And there was a review which we were trying to do about prevalence of traumatic dental injuries in sports persons in India. So then there was a comment which came from their peer review team, that is it a intervention, is it a review related to health? Because they thought sports persons which may be related to sports or athletes. But then we replied to them, it's related to a health problem which they can face. So they accepted it. But then they always look for health interventions, and they look for animal or the human studies.
Um, shall we take one more question, ma'am? The question is, can you throw some light on grading systems of systematic review? And
Yes.
according to you, which one we should follow in dentistry?
So it's quite a broad question. So the systematic reviews can be graded by using the two tools which I mentioned in my slides. One is AmStar 2, The AMSTAR2 is for randomized controlled trials and for non-randomized intervention studies. And that gives you the overall confidence in the findings of a review. So the analysis of that AMSTAR2 will tell us whether you are having a critically low confidence in the findings, low confidence, or a high confidence. While the other tool, which I mentioned, risk of bias or robust tool, that robust tool will tell us whether it is a high risk of bias, low risk of bias, or a moderate risk of bias. So these are the two very good methods to analyze any of the systematic reviews risk of bias. On a personal note, we use a thing which is known as that there should be at least 2 reviewers doing a systematic review, and there should be at least 2 databases which any person has used for doing the literature search when they are doing any systematic review, and they must have performed a quality analysis of the primary studies when they are reporting their findings. If you do not find these 3 things, you can reject the article. That's perfectly fine, because then you won't be adding anything good to the literature. Ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nitesh. I don't see any hand raises, so I think we can wrap up for the day. Most of the questions, almost all, have been answered. I have shared a link in the chat regarding the questions for the day. I would request everyone to please fill them. And the feedback form also would be put it in the chat as well as the WhatsApp group. Thank you so much for joining. And thank you so much, Professor Suresh and Dr. Nitesh, for this lucid presentation. Thanks a lot.
I
Good
think
evening.
both the presentations were superb, and it's so good to see the younger generation taking the lead and going ahead. Keep it up.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.